お前の言う通り雨が降ったぞ。おかげでほとんど濡れずに済んだ。
そうか。
どうした？なんだか元気がないな。
いや、金魚を素手で掴むなよ。
Thank you. So it's not just a normal thing. Okay, my god. So he'd even see me doing that, huh? Caught goldfish handed, man.
金魚屋の親父だってそうしてただろ
でもかわいそうだ。
う。なんだ、私に文句があるのか？
文句というか、金魚飼育の助言というか。
金魚屋の親父がこれでいいと言ったからそうしたまでだ。
売り物の金魚もいっぱい死んでただろう。
Oh my god. Minakami,
ああ、なんでだろうな。
you are like so far the most decent person in this story.
どうした？今日はやけに気が立ってるな。まるで川瀬みたいに横暴だ。
I was trying to hide my bad mood, but he'd seen right through me. When my face suddenly fell, he immediately smiled. Then he twirled his umbrella and came into the shop.
真面目くさって。
Say what you want about my competitive nature, but I didn't want to be compared to Kawase. Understandable, I guess. I gave my goldfish a heap of food to console him. Then went downstairs to where Minakami was waiting. You can't just dump fish food. Oh, like Kawase, Minakami was another childhood friend from the same village and also a student at the Imperial University. Minakami unwrapped the cloth he had brought with him and pulled out some books. He took a few and returned them to the shelf slowly enough to make me yawn. I watched this daily scene with my chin resting in my
適当で
hand.
いいのだ、みなかみ。ここは目的があってくる場所じゃない。適当に眺め、適当に手に取る。それが梅鉢堂の面白さだ。
It was probably just because neither I nor the shopkeeper wanted to go through the trouble of organizing, but wording it that way made it more novel.
そういうことだったのか。吉屋の隣に類香が並んでいるのを見てから、この店はおかしいと思っていたが。
Minakami nodded in understanding as he continued to return the books to the shelf, his hands moving as if he were tracing constellations. Wow, this guy.
だからお前な。
なあ玉森、今気がついたんだが、やはり無意味なんてことはないよ。
Minakami pointed toward the top shelf of the bookcase, as if he had found the planet Venus among the books. So is this guy star themed? Star space themed? Because that's twice now, in very quick succession.
いろはにほほら、例えば類香の80万年後の社会の隣には吉屋の花物語が並んでる。本の題名順に並べられているんだ。
それを適当というのだ。
I finally stood up, grabbed the books from his hand, and shoved them onto the shelf.
考えすぎか？
ミステリー好きが高知だな。だが、規範があるなら守るに越したことはない。
I pulled out Kyusaku's double heart, which Minakami had just put back, and went to return it to the top shelf. Or at least I tried to, but no matter how much I jumped, I couldn't reach. I bet he is taller than us. He is definitely taller than us. Minakami nudged the spine with his hand and pushed it to the back of the shelf.
玉森はこっちを頼む。
まあ、
All 5 books he had given me went onto the bottom shelf. Before I could glare at him and tell him not to make fun of me, he looked back up. I reluctantly got on my knees and put away the books, following his lead.
結局、3日間で何冊読んだんだ？
20冊は借りたかな。
Oh, this guy. Good reader.
20冊って。
I hadn't even read that many books this year. You live in a bookstore, okay.
新作は入れたか？
1ヶ月前から何も変わっていないぞ。
そうか。
残念そうだなって。まさかここにある本全部読破したのか？
おそらく。もうピンとくる題名はないから。
Once Minakami had finished returning all 20 books he'd borrowed, he bent back and looked along the shelves. Then he let out a distant sigh, full of a sense of accomplishment.
4000冊あるんだぞ。
何冊かすでに読んだことがあるものだったから、実際読んだのは300冊くらいだ。
Are you like, can we choose routes in this game?
一段落ついてしまったかな。
Minakami was an abnormally avid reader. If there was a story he hadn't read, it was like he couldn't relax until he had the book. Even though I say he couldn't relax, it wasn't like he would fly into a frenzy or anything. If he found a story he didn't know, he would gently take it in his hands, head to the register, and pay. Then he'd sell it back once he was done reading it. That was all. At first glance, he seemed to be a casual reader, but reading every book in the Imperial University's library was definitely abnormal.
そういえば川瀬に批評をもらうとか言ってただろう。今日はどうだった？
あれな、散々だったよ。
散々？一体何が気に入らなかったんだろう。
Minakami looked thoroughly confused. Unable to bear seeing his face like that, I immediately averted my gaze. He didn't think there was such a thing as a poor piece of literature or writing. That's why he wouldn't hold back with his praise for me. Oh, this guy! Oh! Honestly, when I realized that, I had wondered if it was really okay to find comfort in that ambiguity. And recently I had been asking that brute Kawase for his critiques. If Kawase was a whip, Minakami was candy. He was a candy sweeter than Calspi. Calspi. What my wounded ego needed right now was that sweet candy named Minakami.
明日の昼、川瀬が梅鉢堂に来ることになってる。だからお前も来い。そして川瀬に行って聞かせるのだ。
言って聞かせる？何をだ？
私の輝かざる才能についてだ。お前が言えば奴も少しは私を見返すかもしれん。
すまん。明日の昼は講義があって、そう多くは時間を。
私の言うことが聞けないのか？
Whoa, what?
嫌に必死だな。講義の合間に行けたら行くよ。
いいや、必ず来い。
だから行けたら。
必ず来い。
そう不安がるなよ。
I wasn't in a tizzy at all. I was just lonely.
玉森らしくないな。これでも読んで元気出せ。
Read this and cheer up. Minakami said as he handed me the last book left in his hand. Wondering what it was, I took a look at the cover. It was Kyusaku Yumeno's Dogra Magra.
店の商品を借りっぱなしじゃ悪いからな。読み終わったら商品として並べてくれて構わない。新作だから高値をつけてもいいんじゃないか？
いらん、持って帰れ。
どうしてだ？喜ぶと思ったのに。
私は今忙しいのだ。他人の無双など見ていられん。
そうか。残念だな。
でおい、勝手に商品に混ぜるな。
バレたか。
You calmly put it on the shelf right in front of me. I was so irritable today, I couldn't even get through Minakami's little joke. I went back to the register and slumped over so far that I ended up lying across the counter. This is a nice counter. I saw a single piece of paper flutter down from my slanted point of view. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was written on it in bold print. I peeled it off the desk, lifting it high above my head out of reflex.
震える悪魔って。
ずっと見たがっていただろう。
再上映されるのか。
Hi, it's a movie? A play? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was a horror film. The main characters were a man named Dr. Jekyll and his other personality, Hyde. It showed at the Nikatsu Theater in Kanda last spring, but I had missed its run, and now it was here. I couldn't believe Toyo Cinema was rerunning it. I checked the date and time. It would be playing tomorrow afternoon. It didn't seem to be some sort of cruel joke either.
奥さんから招待券をいただいたんだ。ご婦人方は怪奇映画に興味がないそうだ。
Wait a second. When he said that, it's like a whorehouse like Madame. Does he live there?
そりゃそうだ。女子供にはわからんよ。
けど、お前が忙しいんじゃな。
Are they only rerunning it once?
行かない理由がない。
Or is it the ticket? I thrust the ticket deep into my sleeve. Minakami was shocked by how enthusiastically I'd made up my mind, but he just smiled and nodded.
そう言うと思ったよ。明日の夜、東洋キネマで待ち合わせでいいか？
It's a date!
あ、
Yes. Minakami folded his cloth and stuffed it in his bag, then put on his still damp mantle.
もう行くのか？
テートに古い友人が来ているんだ。これから会いに行ってくる。
Oh, we're lonely. Don't leave.
私の知り合いか？
ああ、いや。どうだろう。
Oh, we're so lonely.
どうだろうって思う。
We were old friends. So didn't that just mean they were just normal acquaintances? Minakami would say nothing more about it, so I stopped pressing him. You're trying to show off again. I wasn't sure if he'd heard my grumbling, but he opened his umbrella and smiled even wider.
勉強も頑張れよ。田舎に残したばあさんのためにもな。
Oh?
そう。
That has nothing to do with this. I was going to throw out my usual comeback, but instantly fell silent. As if he'd seen through it, Minakami furrowed his brows, but immediately hid behind the edge of his umbrella. Wow. So cool. Then, like a falling leaf, he swiftly passed me and disappeared into the rain. Minakami was gone. All that remained was the sound of the rain. Still, he had always left a strange, lingering presence. Maybe he himself didn't realize how unusual it felt. It must have been something only I noticed. Minakami never said goodbye. His departures were always vague. It made me think he would suddenly show up again if I called his name. I was probably the only one who noticed that. But keep up with my studies. I rested my cheek against the counter again and flipped through a reference book Minakami had given me. It had been 2 years. Just looking at the old reference book made me realize that the time had gone by in the blink of an eye. I mentioned it before, but Kawase, Minakami, and I had come to the capital 2 years ago. To say the capital had the finest educational institute in Japan wouldn't have been an exaggeration, and we came to take the Imperial University's entrance exam. I had studied for it. Even though I sometimes read fantasy novels and went to the movies, I had studied ever so diligently, all the time. But a year later, only Kawase and Minakami were accepted to the Imperial University. I was a bum. Since I didn't think any of us would actually pass, I never dreamed I would be the only one to fail. Ooh, Tamamori's story. At the time, Minakami and I were under the care of a philanthropist named Oizumi. She was a widow who acted as if she didn't expect anything from us country bumpkins. "Take as long as you like," she'd said. I had been moved by her words. But when it came to me, the only one who didn't pass, she looked at me with blatant disgust. Dude, everyone is looking at you with disgust, man. 2 years had gone by, and then this year, she had given me a final notice to vacate. She kicked me out of her house. I am a bum now. She told me to be grateful she'd provided me with meals and a place to sleep. Like I cared. If you're going to act like a virtuous person, see it through the end. I provided food and a home for my goldfish, but I didn't feel any bitterness towards him. That's because pets are your own responsibility. In fact, I wanted him to ask more of me. I was much more noble than she was. Yeah. And the shopkeeper of Umebachido was even more noble.
玉森くん、ちょっと散歩してくるよ。
ああ、はい。
店番お願いします。
I heard the back door open. His footsteps and muffled coughs melted into the sound of the rain. Man, he's dying. It had only been a month ago. I'd been driven out of the Oizumi house. I'd fled from her home. Rain like what we were having today beating down on me. I'd had no money, no shelter. What had awaited me in the drizzle was Umebachido's large front doors. To get out of the rain, I'd pretended to look for books. When I let out a gloomy sigh, though, the shopkeeper had spoken to me from the back of the store. I was like a broken record that day. I tried to say something, but I couldn't answer. My voice cracked. It was the only sound that I could get out. But the shopkeeper, with his calm voice full of understanding, had fixed a needle on my record and made me play it all out. He listened to how I'd fled from my previous lodgings, to how I hadn't eaten anything for half a day, to how it had been more than a day since I'd bathed. And once he was done listening, he'd offered me a deal. If I ran the shop, he would rent out the room on the second floor to me. The shop was closed when it was sunny. He said he wanted me to open and run the shop only on rainy days. Every morning he would leave enough money for my meals for the day by the register. That was the only material exchange between us. Everything else was spiritual. That's right. I'd never seen the shop's owner. Not even once. Well, whatever. That's not weird at all. It's been a month. It's fine. As long as I get money for food, right? I went back to leaning my face against my hand and watching the scenery blurred by the rain outside. I was bored. Not really bored. I just couldn't muster any strength into my sluggish body. That's a fancy way of saying lazy. But I urged myself on, grabbed a feather duster, and wandered around the shop. Suddenly, I felt like I saw Kawase through the bookshelves. It was definitely the image of the moment he dug his cigarette into my manuscript. Then, clear as day, I saw Kawase's vulgar smile. Apparently, I was really having a hard time dealing with his harsh criticism. I looked away from that moment and plopped onto the floor. It was annoying. Way too annoying. Man, he looks to me good. But, man, his personality. Maybe it would have been better if a complete stranger had said that to me, but I'd have to keep facing him tomorrow and the day after. There was no way I could run for him now. I was the one who'd asked for his critique. As a writer, all I could do was continue spilling out stories. What's this zoom in? A writer. What sort of writer was I, if I couldn't even satisfy a single person? Kawase holding me back was the reason I never considered taking anything to a publisher. There was probably nothing I could create that would ever captivate him. I'd probably never be able to write anything that could make that guy smile and tell me I'd done a good job. I set my glasses on top of my head and used the palms of my hands to rub my closed eyes. Stars scattered behind my eyelids, and unusual, sparkling patterns formed. Ooh. When I opened my eyes, the area had transformed into a strange, blue dimension. Who are you? When I happened to look forward, I found this guy standing in the rain. Drops dramatically bounced off the leaf he was using as an umbrella. He seemed to be slowly thinking something over in his head while he held his breath in his stomach. It was as if he made up his mind about something. That was all the frog said.
ダメだ。お前のような異形に本は売れん。
僕は異形なんかじゃありません。本読みが大好きな小学1年生です。
Is he having a hallucination? Like, is this real? By the way, this kind of thing happened to me quite often. Yeah, man. I see. I'd had the ability to see strange things for a long time. Except this wasn't anything supernatural. It was an illusion produced by my subconscious. Yes. Honestly, there was a part of me that was a little disappointed this hallucination was only a frog. If his form had been more grotesque, this scene would have been much more dramatic. Man, frog, why didn't you— brain, actually. Your own subconscious. You blame your own subconscious.
本をください。
黙れ。
本をください。
お前はあの日あの時あの橋で殺されたのだ。それに気づかぬ愚かな異形よ。
Do you know this? Is this an actual kid? Like a first grader? Look, you made the frog sweat!
さあ、成仏しろ。
Yeah, that wasn't so bad. It was strange. No matter how poor my creations may have been, in the moment, they seemed brilliant. When I'd asked Kawase about that phenomenon, he called it a narcissism derived from arrogance. That's... wow, look who's talking, man. It was definitely arrogance. Those stupid eyes, those short legs, that nervously trembling body. This. I was starting to find the hallucination somewhat amusing. Suddenly, I was no longer myself. The main character was... Right, the owner of a used bookstore, by all appearances, but he was secretly a medium. It was a setup that made me think of a certain someone, but whatever. The main character should be refined, composed, and wear glasses that make him look like an intellect. But then he would shockingly use a hickish word like ain't.
ほら
The frogman's eyes opened wide when he looked over at Haruhiko the shopkeeper. Taking a direct hit, he sank into the opposite wall.
ひどいひどい。
おかえりネガオ。ここは君の来る場所ではない。
ひどい。僕はただ本が読みたいだけなのに。
君にジンゴが読めるかね。
読めないから読むんです。そうして学んで僕も人間になってあの人間に。
あの人間とは。
The tears the frogman cried turned into nourishment and replenished the moisture in his body. Blop! He rolled off the wall and took the defensive, turning his eyes, tinged with rage, towards Haruhiko. The frogman skillfully manipulated his tongue and began to push the books off the shelves one by one. Haruhiko's attacks and blocks were in vain as the tongue suddenly pierced through a bookcase. Books rained down from the falling bookcase. However, the decision Haruhiko made in that very instant was even more surprising. Huh? Oh. When I suddenly snapped out of it, I was lying on the floor grasping a pen. Before me was a manuscript in the middle of writing. Perhaps because I was writing before the ink could dry, there were several letters smudged to the left. Apparently, I had been a little overzealous. I counted the scattered manuscript pages as I gathered them up, but I was missing the first page. When I happened to turn around, a man was looking down at me, concerned. Who is this mysterious man? It is...
大丈夫ですか
A Batchman!
ええ、大丈夫です。私は無事です。
無事これ足元に落ちていました。
ありがとうございます。
He was still standing there.
何か？
ごめんなさい。
He jumped back and put some distance between us. He looked at me and scratched his eye patch as if he were embarrassed. Once I got a better look, I recognized him. He was a customer who always came in the evening. That meant that half of the day had already passed. I let out a directionless sigh. The man seemed to misunderstand and jumped a bit.
君は作家さんなんですね。
何か文句でも？
いえ、そんな。落ちている原稿を少し読んでしまったんです。悪気はないんです。ただ目について。すみません。面白かったです。
それでこの私に何用ですか？
これをお会計してもらいたくて。
The manuscript? In his hand was Kyusaku's Dogra Magra. That's the book that Minakami gave us. Damn Minakami, he had ended up shoving it into the bookshelf after all.
それに関してお題はいりません。
でも結構真新しい本ですし。
いいんです。欲しいなら黙ってもらってください。
ありがとうございます。それじゃあご好意に甘えて。
What an overly dramatic guy. He continued to stand there, nervously wringing his hands and biting his lip. I slipped past him and returned to the register. He looked at me as if he still had something to say.
何なんですかさっきから。
すみません。
6時には店を閉めますよ。
物々交換というのはどうですか？
So that's what he decided to say. He slowly opened his bag and pulls out some sort of goldfish watering can made of tin. Oh, there it is, on the table. I didn't expect him to place it by the register with a clunk.
は
Huh?
僕ブリキの収集が趣味で
Not to the point where you carry them around though, right?
ごめんなさい気持ち悪いですよねいきなりこんなことごめんなさいごめんなさい気持ち悪くてごめんなさい
It was creepy. What I was thinking must have gotten through to him. Once he calmed down, his face turned red and he ran out of Umebachito. What the hell? The only ones left were me and the goldfish watering can. What was that about? I let out a sigh as I looked into Goldfish's pretty eyes. The sigh, though, was unrelated.
鬼人だな
Anyway, I'd managed to finish a short story about a heroic battle between a used bookstore owner and a yokai. I gathered the bulky manuscript and looked over it fondly. But for some reason, my face began to fall as I turned each page. Suddenly, it seemed boring. I figured Minakami would definitely enjoy it, since his tastes were closer to my own, but I mostly wondered how Kawase would feel about it. That's right, isn't it? Whenever those who are closest to us give us negative opinions about something, we think about their opinions more than other people who have positive opinions. That's just the way things are. Yeah, I should probably avoid it showing to Kawase. I turned the manuscript over and put the ink bottle on top as a weight. It was something like a gut feeling. For some reason, my suddenly cooled fervor had made my heart feel as it was crumbling to pieces. I wondered why. This was the first time I'd ever felt this way. At that moment, the cuckoo clock sleepily struck 6. It was closing time. The rain was coming down even harder, and it was so cold I wondered if it would turn to snow. Chasing out the sound of the rain, I closed the doors, then looked around the shop once more. Where's the shopkeeper? In the end, the only customer today had been that man with the eye patch, Chong. But he hadn't really bought anything, so I had no money to turn over to the shopkeeper. Actually, I'd never earned more money than what the shopkeeper gave me for food. That was another reason that Umebachito was a mysterious shop.
玉森君、私は先に寝るよ。
Oh, he came back. I thought he went out, but we didn't see him come back. Okay.
帰ってきていたんですか
Okay, yeah. You're back, man?
ええ、2時間ほど前にね、声をかけたじゃないか。
So he saw us on the floor, I guess.
そういえば
Oh, I'm back. Get away, it's dangerous here.
何かと戦っていたのかな。
Oh, that's kind of cute.
それじゃ、おやすみなさい。
Man, who is this mystery man? He's got like hair that's like kind of like ours. The light clicked off.
私は風呂屋に行ってきます
Isn't it raining?
うん。風邪をひかないようにね。
As far as I could remember, the shopkeeper had never pressed me about money. Not even once. In short, this place was heaven to an unscrupulous, I never know how to read this this word, person as myself. Okay, let's look at the map and it's gone. Even though it was only 6 o'clock, the sky was totally dark thanks to the rainy weather. Is it wise to go for a bath and then come back out into the rain? Everyone was deep under their umbrellas while I was freezing under my black mantle. Do you have an umbrella? Do we have an umbrella? I should have at least worn long sleeves, but I ended up foolishly picking out a short-sleeved dress shirt, so I was freezing. People who were weak to the cold were gathered at Sarugakucho's Kikai bathhouse. The old men passing me by smelled unseasonably of yuzu. Ooh, silhouettes. Once I'd gone through the dressing room into the baths, the place was filled with nothing but old and middle-aged men. I know some people who would like that. What looked like an old woman's head bobbed among them. I took my place in the middle as I watched the old woman's head sway. Speaking of old women, are we going to talk about our grandmother? Keep up with your studies. For the grandmother you left out in the country. I recalled Minakami's words. Tamamori's story. It's a little late, but here's some background on myself. My father and mother died when I was young. Right before I was born, my father was attacked by a bear and died. Then, when I was young, my mother disappeared from our village and probably died. After that, I had lived with my grandfather and grandmother, just the three of us. But last year, I found out my grandfather had passed away. My grandmother was my only blood relative left on this earth. Well, you don't know if your mom is still alive or not, so I wouldn't write her off so quickly. I felt like my grandmother and I were connected by some sort of spiritual power. If there was anything I wanted to eat or anything I desired, she knew exactly what it was and gave it to me right away. Is that good parenting? We were connected. Well, maybe not quite. The connection was only a one-way thing. I knew nothing about her. Even now, it felt like my grandmother was watching me from somewhere. That's a bit creepy. Is it that woman? The old woman turned around. It was an old man! Of course an old woman wouldn't be hanging out in a men's bath. When I turned around, my consciousness drifted towards the bathhouse Fuji that reached all the way to the ceiling. I'd heard the bathhouse Fuji, which was found in any old bathhouse nowadays, originated from Kikai Bathhouse. Fuji's healing waters and steam from the bath mixed together, making me feel like I was partaking in a purification ritual. Goodness knows you need it. It was a picturesque view no man could ever grow tired of seeing. When I happened to look over at the group of bathers to my side, they were turned away from that view of Mount Fuji, exchanging hushed whispers. I cocked my right ear to listen in for no reason in particular. These look like young boys, not young men. Okay. Did you see? Did you hear? What? About the giant of Jimbocho. Giant. He's over 6 feet tall. Another one butted in. He doesn't use an umbrella. And he wears a funny mask. As soon as I spotted him, he vanished. He's weird looking. Is he a monster? Or a ghost? I see. How interesting. Maybe it was a silent street performer for a new kabuki show. Or maybe some sort of promotion for a new motion picture. That earthquake earlier must have been from the giant's footsteps. Idiot! No, it had to be. He had a pretty active imagination. You're one to talk?
少年よ
Let's approach these random bathers. Everyone's naked.
は？何？
その話詳しくお聞かせ願いたい
They fell silent. After looking at each other a few times, they snorted. And then they showed me their cheeky, giggling faces. I thought they were gonna moon him.
バーカ。
な
子供の話にマジになってんじゃねえよ。
どういうことだ
They instantly cracked up hard enough to shake the bath. When I glanced around, everyone was staring at me with dead looks in their eyes. Oh man. What? It was like I was the one being made a fool.
おい待て
うるせえ浪人生。
なぜそれを
They distanced themselves from me in a train-like procession. Seriously, the brats around here didn't know how to behave. You're one to talk. If they were innocent children, they would have wanted an adult to listen to them, and would have gladly told their story. How dare they make fun of an adult and insult the ambitious title of Ronin-sei? An annoyed groan escaped from between my clenched teeth. When I came to my senses, and looked around, even more cold stares were focused on me. Did he, like, vague out? Not good. I sank down up to my nose in the tub and hid myself as I made my way from corner to corner. Map. Gone. Let's go back home. Without cooling off from my bath, I headed straight back to Umebaichido and promptly faced my manuscript. I ignored the Frogman manuscript and was going to dive right back into continuing The Phantom in the Basement. But, as expected, I couldn't get the rumor I'd heard from those brats in Kikai Bathhouse out of my head. He doesn't use an umbrella, and he wears a funny mask. I figured it was a promotion for a show, but somehow it was spot on. The Phantom in the Basement would curl up his large body in the cellar where he lived. Then, night after night, he would come up to the world on the surface and abduct someone on the verge of death. He had no interest in those trying to live. He was trying to harvest their organs. He would suddenly disappear when he'd been seen because he could sense that person's life force. Just what were the phantom in the basement's motives? Well, it's a long story, so I'll explain later.
思念というものがある。
Suddenly,
春彦さん。
you're seeing things, man. The moment I sensed the presence, my hallucination, Hariko-san, was sitting right beside me. Oh god. On his shoulder was a frogman who had shrunken down because his spiritual powers had been subdued.
何かね。
いえ、ただどうして？
筆が止まっているのはなぜかと思って出てきた所存だ。
Oh. This is like, was it Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends? My hallucinations were talking to me now. I must have been tired. I thought about keeping quiet and letting it pass, but he began to thoroughly read my manuscript.
勝手に読まないでください。
うん。この怪人、確かにさっきの少年たちが話していた怪人とそっくりだな。
聞いてたんですか？
思念に姿形はない。思念とは感情と認識だけで形成されている無形の存在だ。
だから何の話ですか？
ここは何の町だ、玉森君。
神保町、本の町です。
本とは空想、空想とは無形、空想は思念に通ず。君が地下室の怪人を描いたのは偶然ではない。
どういうことです？
怪人という無形の思念が一人歩きしているのだ。
This ink heart? Walking around on its own. If that was the case, did I get that idea from somewhere?
つまりは玉森君、そう深く考える必要はないということだ。
With those last words, Hariko-san suddenly disappeared. What was he thinking? I had no idea. Yeah. My hallucinations were something born from my subconscious, but up until now, I don't think I'd ever had a hallucination leave me with words I couldn't understand. Thinking about it was pointless. After all, I probably understood it subconsciously. Yeah. For the first time in my life, the idea of having a pen in my hand seemed awful, so I lay in my futon. I get it. I get that. I get it. I stretched out my hand to turn off the light, but I couldn't reach it. All I ended up doing was illuminating my hand, just like in the anime openings when they go against the sun. I eventually gave up and shut out the light with my own eyelids. Alright. And we will end it here. Yes, let's make a new save file. Okay. Okay. I wonder, can we click settings? Ah, I see. I was just a fool. I clicked the gear. I didn't click the, yeah. Alright. Let's go back to title.